Well, to talk more about the prison camp, we're joined by Michael O'Hanlon, Philip Knight Chair in Defence and Strategy at the Brookings Institution. Thank you very much for joining us. So, as we heard there in that report, 39 men do remain at Guantanamo 20 years after the September 11 terror attacks. What do we know about them, and why are they still being held?
Greetings, and thanks for having me on. And by the way, it is interesting and I think important for Americans to know that this story still is being covered internationally. We talk about it a lot less here. It doesn't mean it's unimportant. But to your question, and your news coverage was very spot on, there is an unwillingness in the Congress to see any site within the proper 50 states of the United States be designated to hold these individuals, who include Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. By all accounts, probably the #1 operational planner, and a number of others who have not been repatriated or who are otherwise considered to be so dangerous or so integral to the original plot that we just didn't want to trust even an ally with them. Frankly, I think there are greater human rights problems in American foreign policy than still holding 39 detainees at Guantanamo. For example, the casualties from some of our air operations abroad, or trying to send some of these detainees to allies who may not have good legal systems or good human rights practices themselves. I would actually rate those two concerns even higher on my human rights radar screen. But the bottom line answer to your question is it's people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and the reason they can't be repatriated to the United States and tried here is we haven't figured out legally what to do with some of them, who we are unwilling in some cases to put through a normal legal process because we have only classified information on which they're being detained. We can't use that in court, and we can't bring them to the United States because of political opposition within the Congress. So those are the answers as to why we still have this dilemma.
So are they to be held indefinitely without ever seeing trial? Should the camp not be closed? I mean, there are studies that say that many of the inmates were in fact innocent, that never carried out any attacks against American interests.
That's possible, although the use of the term many should be qualified. We used to have, I think, more than 600 detainees.
Well, half. One study says half of the 780 men who were held.
Right, but my point is, as your story, I think, correctly reported, we're down to double-digit numbers of detainees now. So more than 90% have been otherwise dealt with, either released or incarcerated through the criminal justice system or sent to other countries. So the magnitude of those, I'm not trying to defend the fact that we still hold 39, but it is worth emphasizing that the main way we've dealt with this is one by one, trying to find something else to do with each person where we felt there was a viable alternative. In some cases, like I said, someone is seen as just too dangerous, too integral to the 9/11 plot, or somebody who can't be properly tried in a criminal court because the information is either classified or otherwise shaky. And you're right, in some cases, that means people should be exonerated. In other cases, we may have a pretty strong conviction they are guilty, we just can't prove it, and we're not willing to turn them loose to try again. So I think you just got to keep scrutinizing these individuals one by one, because I don't see any other solution at the moment.
What about the argument then that, this prison camp was built while the US was at war with the Taliban in Afghanistan? That war is over, the US has left the country. Is it more likely then that it will be closed this year or in the next few years?
I don't know, because as you're aware, a lot of the detainees have nothing to do with Afghanistan. I mean, the so-called war on terror was a global war on terror, at least straddling much of the region from which your television channel is located, and both east and west, north and south from that location. So this is not just Taliban or not just Afghanistan. Actually, my greater concern with Guantanamo is always that we built it in Cuba. I don't like the fact the United States has held on to a military base on another country's sovereign territory just because we could, and we didn't like the revolution that happened there 60 years ago. And this allowed us to escape some of the normal American legal requirements for holding detainees, because Cuba is, of course, not American soil. That bothers me more than the question about Afghanistan per se, because this was never just about Afghanistan.
Sure, but it was built where it is because that allowed the US to operate outside of international law and the restraints of the Geneva Convention. Does that not, as we heard from the Human Rights Watch colleague there, does that not really undermine America's moral position on the world stage? When China looks at this, when Russia looks at this, America is doing this, why can't we?
Well, first of all, what it really the loophole we were looking for had less to do with international human rights law or law than U.S. domestic law. Because if we had brought these individuals onto American territory, we couldn't have just detained them indefinitely without charges. So that's the real loophole we were looking for better or for worse. In terms of defending, my country does a lot of things wrong. In terms of defending our human rights record vis-a-vis China or Russia, that's not really at the top of my list, with all due respect.
Michael.
However, I take your point that we do need to keep making sure that there aren't innocent people being held.
Michael,
Let me owe anybody any apologies for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.